For today's Tool Time Tuesday, we're going to be doing something a little bit different here. It's not about adding a new tool to your arsenal, more like making the most of what you've already got. You see, let's say you got yourself a good old air compressor, 30 gallons. That's about average for the average garage weekend warrior. Now, you can have half-inch hoses. You can have G-type fittings. But all that means nothing if the connections coming out of the bushings of your air compressor are only 1/4 inch MPT. This is a problem. Airflow downline is great, but if it gets restricted anywhere, and that includes right freaking here, well, you're not going to get the most power out of your tools. Now here's the dealio. These 30-gallon air compressors don't have a bushing that goes from whatever size thread this is to 1/2 inch or even 3/8 inch MPT. You're kind of stuck with the 1/4 inch MPT fittings. But what I'm going to do is modify what we have to go to 1/2 inch MPT. And I'll put a link in the description to where you can get a spare one of these big old bushings right here. So that way you can practice on doing what I have done to mine. That's the wrong one. Aha, here we go. This is the same fitting. It's unpainted because Porter Cable, DeWalt, and a few other companies actually make the same air compressor. But yeah, this is basically the same thing, only with a much bigger opening for 1/2 inch. Basically, we just drilled and tapped 1/2 inch NPT fittings on this thing. So all we got to do is unscrew this, screw this in its place, and voila, we have a bigger hole. Now, we're going to need to get some extra parts to make this work right here. So let's head on over to Yield Home Depot. All right, off to the pipe fittings. Aha, here we are. All right, let's get some parts. So first things first, we got to get ourselves a little bit of distance between the bushing and the rest of the components. So we got ourselves a 1/2 inch by 2.5 inch nipple that we're going to use. And then next, we're going to get ourselves another component to split up the air. Next, we're going to use this cross pipe to turn one airflow pipe into 3, and I'll explain in a little bit why that is. Now we got to convert 1/2 inch back to 1/4 inch because all of the pressure switch systems require 1/4 inch fittings. But that's just for the pressure switch system. Everything else coming out of the left and the right will be full flow 1/2 inch piping. So that way we don't have any of those restrictions. Now we're not going to be using both of the left and the right outputs right now. But if we ever wanted to expand the capacity of our tank, we could make a connection to another tank to daisy chain to our air compressor. But for now, we're just going to use this square head plug to block this spot off, and we're just going to use the one output for the time being. And then we just add one more nipple to the side that we're going to plug all of our hose line adapters and accessories to. So this will have our regulator, our water air separator, and our oil fogger coming out on this side. Now, you got to use a big old drill bit to drill out the center. And then over at Harbor Freight, we got this thing. It's actually pretty cheap for what it is. Trying to find a part number. There's the item number. It comes in this nice little wooden box with a bunch of things right here. Now, this is 1/4 inch NPT. And this is 1/2 inch NPT. We're going to get a lot more airflow when we are done with this. So for the record, this is absolutely not the right way to use a tap. You shouldn't be using a breaker bar on this sort of thing. But I needed to have the threads go down a little further so I could get more contact between the nipple and the threads inside of the bushing. And, well, it requires a lot of force because this is some pretty strong metal. Now, this does work, but if you have a better way of doing it, I would advise taking that better way. Don't forget to use some good old cutting fluid. All right, round round 2. Haha, that's much better. Much deeper engagement on the threads. That way I can put some PTFE tape around it and make sure I don't leak anything. But this ought to do just nicely. Just maybe find a less janky way to do it than I did. You might be wondering how exactly to turn a pipe without any sort of hex fitting. Well, these Doyle pliers are freaking fantastic. You get them at Harbor Freight for pretty cheap. And they do the job. They've got this pipe shape around the actual part that grips. So you get a nice sturdy connection. Granted, we're marring up the surface a little bit, but I wouldn't worry about it. It's not going to damage the structural integrity of the pipe. Pipe's just fine. Now we don't want to get this cross pipe on all the way quite yet, as tight as it'll go, because we don't know exactly what position it's going to be facing. Preferably, what will happen is when we put it on the air compressor, it'll be facing 90 degrees to the left and 90 degrees to the right, quite like we have it already right here. Now the beauty of MPT fittings is they will work with a little bit of give in terms of the angle that you have it, as long as you got some PTFE pipe tape on it. So let's finish up a little bit of what we're doing over here, and then we can get to discussing exactly the details of this design. Earlier in the video, I was alluding to using this other spot right here as a tank extension, and that's a legitimate thing. People do that. So if we have this in place of everything, let's say I get another air compressor tank, just the tank. Well, I can use this fitting to plumb into another tank that I can put remotely or wherever I want, and then possibly double or triple the capacity if I really wanted to. Now, granted, on a standard 120 volt breaker, you know, these motors are going to take forever to pump that up, but it can be done. So if I wanted to extend the amount of time I can use an air compressed tool, well, it's a possibility to just upgrade in the future to another tank that I could just put right beside it. Because I know that this doesn't make a whole lot of sense to do on just a 30-gallon tank. 30 gallons isn't a lot of air, but if you can expand the amount of air that you can use, well, suddenly this whole thing doesn't sound so silly, does it? All right, so let's go ahead and do this thing. First, obviously, unplug the power cord and detach your airline hose. Now, here's the dealio. I don't actually have a 1/2-inch air regulator yet. It's coming in the mail still. But I want to test the rest of this, make sure everything's working right. So we're going to step down to 1/4 inch just at the regulator for now, but that's really the easiest part to replace once we get a new regulator. It's everything else that I want to make sure works properly. So just check that your wiring is done properly. If your wiring looks different than mine, then don't copy it. But that's why I said take a picture before you start this whole process. I had to consult my pictures just to make sure I put everything in just the right way. And it should look a little something like this. All right, maiden voyage. All right, we're all pumped up. And I don't hear any leaks. So I think we are good.